My name is Blake Ramsey, and until recently, I thought I had it all figured out at 31. I had a dream job at Space Conquest, part of a large aerospace company, where I worked on an exciting NASA project. My responsibility was developing a rescue system for a new manned spacecraft. For a space engineer like me, it was a dream come true. Life at home was just as fulfilling. My wife Tracy and I had been happily married for 7 years. We had 3 beautiful children. Tyler, our 7-year-old. My son and our twin girls Beth and Emily, who were 6, were everything to me. I always tried to balance work with spending quality time at home. We were lucky to have our parents nearby, who loved pampering their grandchildren. Tracy's sister Lucy was also a big part of our lives. We lived in a cozy neighborhood in a spacious 4-bedroom house, which was perfect for our growing family. We even planned to convert the basement into additional living space for when our daughters grew up. Tracy and I met in college, where we quickly fell in love. I was immersed in aerospace engineering at the time. Tracy went into paralegal work after having Tyler. She took a break after he was born, but came back after the twins arrived. As our daughters started school, I noticed subtle changes in Tracy's behavior. She seemed distant, often pointing out problems in our relationship. I hadn't noticed before, but I brushed it off thinking it was just the stress of balancing work and family life. One evening after leaving the twins at my parents' house for the weekend, I was looking forward to spending some alone time with Tracy. When I arrived home, I was taken aback. Tracy was dressed to the nines in a stunning black dress, high heels, and flawless makeup. 9 in a stunning black dress, high heels, and flawless makeup. Wow, you look incredible, baby, I exclaimed. If you had said we were going somewhere, I would have hurried home. She smiled, but there was something off in her grin. Actually, we're not going anywhere together, she said. I'll go out. But not with you. I was stunned. Wait, what do you mean I'm going out with my boss, Stanley Cross? Tracy said, her voice devoid of any emotion. This is just the beginning. From now on, the new rules will come into force. Stan will pick me up for the night, and I won't be home today or tomorrow. I'll be back Sunday. When she said what she said, it hit me like a ton of bricks. I was like, what do you mean? She said, you need to calm down and accept this new agreement. I was like, everything will be as it will be. I'm leaving, but I'll be back on Sunday afternoon. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. If you're leaving, then don't come. I said I'd be back, Blake. We're still married and I'm coming home, but you have to understand. I need more. If you complicate things, you'll leave on your own. Our children would be sad to see their father suffer financial ruin and go to jail. Let's sit down and discuss the necessary changes. It'd be best to sort this out before Stan gets here. He'll be here in about 30 minutes. You wouldn't want him to have to get involved. I felt a wave of panic and anger. My perfect life was crumbling right in front of me, and I didn't know what to do. The following morning, I woke up with my thoughts were consumed by Tracy's revelation from the previous night. I couldn't look at her as we got the kids ready for school. Tyler was excited about a school project, while the twins Beth and Emily chatted happily about their upcoming playdate with friends. It broke my heart to think about how other people's lives could be ruined by the truth of our situation after dropping the kids off. Tracy and I sat in the kitchen, the silence between us thick and suffocating. Finally, she broke the silence. Blake, we need to finish our conversation from last night, she said softly, her eyes avoiding mine. Mine? I nodded, feeling a lump form in my throat. Okay, let's talk. Tracy took a deep breath. I know this is hard for you to understand, but I'm not happy. I haven't been for a while. Stanley makes me feel alive again. I know it sounds awful, but it's the truth. I clenched my fists under the table. What does this mean for us and our family? She paused, then continued. It means we need to find a way to coexist. I don't want to leave you or the kids, but I need this part of my life too. Stanley and I have talked about it, and we think this arrangement can work. I shook my head in disbelief. She said that she needed to accept that I was seeing another man and that I was spending weekends with him. I asked her if she loved me, and she said that it was the only way she could stay sane. I told her that I still loved her, but that I needed more than what we had. I said that we had a family, a home, and a life that we built together. She started to cry. I wish it were otherwise, but it's not. I've tried to ignore these feelings, but I can't anymore. I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. What about Stanley? What does he get out of this? He wants to be with me, she said simply. He understands me in a way that Tracy, this is crazy. I know it's a lot to ask, but I believe it's the only way we can all be happy. I understand, but I'm not sure I can do it. I can't accept this. She looked at me with pleading eyes. We'll have to figure something else out. But please, Blake, try to understand. This isn't about hurting you or the kids. It's about me finding a way to be whole again. I stopped pacing and looked at her. I really looked at her. I saw the pain in her eyes. Despite my anger and betrayal, I still loved her. But this was too much. Tracy, I need time to process this. I said, I can't just agree to something like this overnight. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. I understand. Take all the time you need. As I walked out of the kitchen, I felt a mix of emotions. Anger, sadness, confusion. The woman I loved was asking me to accept the impossible, and I didn't know if I could. Over the next few days, I tried to carry on as usual, but the weight of Tracy's confession hung over me like a dark cloud. Every time I looked at her, I saw that the distance between us was growing, and it seemed like there was no way to bridge the gap. One evening, after putting the kids to bed, I decided to confront her again. Tracy, we need to talk, I said, my voice steady but firm. She nodded, setting down her book. Okay, I've been thinking about what you said. I began, and I still don't know if I can accept it, but I need to understand why Stanley. Why now? She sighed, looking down at her hands. It's not something I planned, Blake. It just happened. We connected on a level that I can't explain, and as for why now, I guess I just reached a breaking point. I couldn't. I felt a pang of sympathy despite my anger. But what about the kids? How do we explain this to them? We don't, she said quickly. At least not yet. They're too young to understand. We'll tell them when they're older, if we need to. I shook my head. This isn't just about us, Tracy. This affects, our whole family is affected here. I know, she said softly. I'm sorry, but I need this, Blake. I need to find a way to be happy again. As I looked at her, I realized that despite everything, I still loved her. But could I really share her with another man? Could I accept this new reality she was proposing? I don't know. If I can do this, I'll try for the kids and for us, she said, taking my hand. Thank you, Blake. That's all I can ask. As we sat there holding hands, I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe just maybe we could find a way to make this work. But deep down, I knew that nothing would ever be the same again. The days that followed Tracy's surprising announcement were a bit of a blur. I couldn't focus at work, and every time I looked at my kids, I felt sad because they were so innocent and unaware of the challenges my family was facing. I knew I had to have a conversation with Stanley. I couldn't just sit back and let things happen. On Friday afternoon, I left work early, my mind racing with thoughts of what I would say. I arrived at Tracy's office building, my hands sweaty and my heart pounding as I walked through the lobby. I felt a mix of anger and determination when I reached Stanley's office. I knocked on the door. His secretary, a young woman with bright red hair, looked up in surprise. Can I help you? She asked. I'm here to see Mr. Cross, I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. No appointment? She asked, eyeing me suspiciously. No, but he'll want to see me, I answered. I took a deep breath and knocked on the door. His secretary, a young woman with bright red hair, looked up in surprise. Can I help you? She asked. I'm here to see Mr. Cross, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Do you have an appointment? She asked, eyeing me suspiciously. No, but he'll want to see me, I replied. She thought for a moment, then picked up the phone and spoke quietly. After a moment, she looked back at me and nodded. You can go in, she said, pointing to the door. I walked in, my heart pounding in my chest. Stanley was sitting behind his large mahogany desk, looking every bit the powerful executive. Up, surprised to see me, Blake Ramsey, he said, leaning back in his chair. What do I owe the pleasure? Cut the crap, Stanley, I said, my voice shaking with anger. We need to talk. He raised an eyebrow, clearly amused. What about Tracy? I said, stepping closer to his desk. I know about the affair. He smirked. I leaned forward and said firmly, you don't get to waltz into my life and tear my family apart. Stanley stood up, his expression hardening. Blake, I think you're misunderstanding the situation. Tracy came to me. She's unhappy with you, not the other way around. That's not the point. My fists clenched at my sides. She's my wife. Those are my kids. You don't belong in our lives. He walked around the desk, standing just a few feet away from me. Tracy deserves to be happy. If she's not getting that from you, then it's not my problem. I felt my anger boiling over. You arrogant son of a bitch. He said it through gritted teeth. He thought he could just take whatever he wanted. I was shocked. I didn't know what to say. I was so angry. I didn't know what to do. I lunged at him, grabbing him by the collar. I said, you're going to stay away from my family, or so help me, I'll make you regret it. Stanley didn't flinch. He just smiled coldly. Blake, you think you're scaring me, but I've dealt with men like you before. You're not going to win at that moment. The door burst open and Tracy rushed in, her face pale. Blake, stop, she cried, running over to us. I let go of Stanley and stepped back. Tracy, this isn't right. We can't keep living like this. She looked at me, tears in her eyes. Blake, please, this isn't helping. Stanley adjusted his collar and gave a smug look. Listen to your wife, Blake. This isn't the way to handle things. I turned to Tracy. My heart was breaking. Is this really what you want? She nodded, her voice barely a whisper. I need this, Blake. I need to find my own happiness. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of it all. Her words, and what about our kids? What about us? We'll find a way to make it work, she said, her voice trembling. But I can't go back to how things were. I looked at Stanley, my anger still simmering. If you hurt her, I swear I'll make you pay. He shrugged, unbothered. I'm not going to hurt her. I care about her. Tracy reached out and touched my arm. Blake, let's go home. We'll talk more there. I nodded, feeling defeated as we walked out of the office. I couldn't shake the feeling that everything was slipping away. The life we had built, the dreams we shared. It all seemed to be crumbling that evening, after the kids were in bed. Tracy and I sat down to talk. The silence was heavy. With unspoken fears and doubts, Blake began, her voice soft. I know this is hard, but I need you to understand. I love you, but I'm not happy, and if I'm not happy, I can't be the wife and mother I want to be. I looked at her, tears in my eyes. I just don't understand, Tracy. How do we get here? She shook her head, tears streaming down her face. I don't know how, but I need to find a way to be happy again. I hope you can find a way to be happy too. As I sat there holding her hand, I realized that our lives would never be the same. But I also knew that I couldn't give up on my family. No matter what, I had to find a way to move forward for the sake of our children and the love we once had. I shared the confrontation with Stanley and it left me drained, but it also gave me clarity. I couldn't just sit back and watch my life unravel. I needed to fight for my family, my dignity, and my future. The next step was clear. I needed a lawyer who could help me navigate this mess. I called Jack, an old friend who had always been there for me. He was a top lawyer. I met with a lawyer who was known for his sharp mind and relentless determination. He agreed to meet me the next day. We sat in his office, surrounded by shelves filled with law books and case files. Jack listened intently as I told him everything. Tracy's affair, Stanley's threats, and my fears for the future. This is a tough situation, Jack said, leaning back in his chair. But you have rights, and we're going to fight for them. What do we do first? I asked, feeling a mix of hope and anxiety. We started by gathering evidence. He said we needed to prove the affair and show that Stanley had been manipulating the situation. I'll file for divorce on grounds of infidelity and seek full custody of the kids. I nodded, feeling the surge of determination. Let's do it over the next few weeks. Jack and I worked tirelessly. He hired a private investigator to gather evidence of the affair and we documented everything. Text messages, emails, and photos. It was tough to see the proof of Tracy's betrayal, but it was necessary. One night after the kids were asleep, Tracy and I sat in the living room. The air between us was heavy with unspoken words. Blake, what are you doing? She asked. Her voice was filled with worry. I'm protecting our family, I replied. I'm not going to let Stanley ruin our lives. She looked away, tears in her eyes. I never wanted it to come to this. Neither did I. I said softly. But you made your choice as the proceedings began, and the tension in our house grew unbearable. Tracy moved into the guest bedroom, and our interactions became cold and distant. The kids sensed something was wrong, but we tried to shield them as much as possible. One night after a particularly stressful day in court, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my mind racing with thoughts of the future. Suddenly, there was a soft knock on the door. Blake, are you awake? Tracy's voice was barely a whisper. Yeah, I replied, sitting up. Come in. She opened the door and stepped inside, looking fragile and lost. Can we talk? I nodded, moving over to make room for her on the bed. She sat down, and for a moment we just looked at each other. I'm sorry, she said, her voice breaking. I'm so sorry for everything. I know, I replied, my heart aching, but sorry doesn't fix this. She reached out and took my hand. I miss us, Blake. I miss the way things used to be. I sighed, squeezing her hand gently. I miss it, but we've both changed, and we can't just pretend this never happened. Tears streamed down her face. I wish I could take it all back. We can't go back. I said quietly. We can only move forward. She nodded, and for a moment we just sat there in silence. Then she leaned in and kissed me. It was a tentative, gentle kiss filled with years of love and regret. I still love you, she whispered. I love you too, I replied, but this is complicated. She nodded, lying down beside me. We didn't say anything else. We just held each other, finding a small measure of comfort in the familiarity of each other's presence. The next morning, we woke up tangled together. The sunlight filtering through the curtains for a brief moment felt like everything was normal, like we were just a husband and wife waking up to a new day. But reality quickly set in, and we both knew that the road ahead was still fraught with challenges in the courtroom. Jack was a force to be reckoned with. He presented our case with precision, showing the judge the evidence of Tracy's affair and Stanley's manipulations. Tracy's lawyer tried to paint me as a controlling husband, but Jack skillfully countered every argument. One day, during a particularly heated session, Tracy took the stand. Her eyes met mine as she began to speak. She said, "Blake is a wonderful father." Her voice was steady, and she said she regretted the pain she caused him. But she added, "I need to find my own happiness, and I believe we can co-parent. We need to raise our kids in a way that supports their well-being." I felt a lump in my throat as she spoke. Despite everything, I still loved her, and it hurt to see her up there defending her actions when it was my turn to testify. I took a deep breath and tried to keep my emotions in check. I love my children more than anything, and I'd want what's best for them. Tracy's actions have put our family in a bad way, and I think it's important for our kids to be happy. The judge listened carefully and took notes as we presented our arguments after several weeks of testimony. Finally, the day of the verdict came, and we stood in the courtroom, feeling the tension. The court has looked at all the evidence and testimonies. It's clear that both parties want what's best for the kids. However, the instability caused by Mrs. Ramsey's actions can't be ignored. Therefore, custody of the kids is awarded to Mr. Ramsey, with visitation rights granted to Mrs. Ramsey. I felt a wave of relief wash over me. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was a step towards rebuilding our lives. As we left the courtroom, Tracy approached me, her eyes filled with sadness. "Blake, I hope we can find a way to make this work." "I hope Epo too," I replied. For the kids, we parted ways, knowing that the road ahead would be tough, but we both knew we had to do our best for our kids. It wasn't the ending I'd hoped for, but it was a fresh start, and I was determined to make it work. The courtroom was quiet, and there was a heavy, almost tangible tension in the air. Tracy and I sat opposite each other. We were on opposite sides, with our lawyers waiting by our sides. The last few weeks had been a roller coaster of emotions, with both of us fighting for what we believed was best for our children. Now it all came down to this moment. Judge Williams was a stern woman in her late 50s with a reputation for fairness. The judge entered the room and took her seat. She glanced at the documents in front of her, then looked up and met my eyes briefly before moving to Tracy. The court had reviewed all the evidence and testimonies. Judge Williams spoke again, her voice steady and authoritative. "This has been a difficult case, given the emotional and complex nature of the circumstances." I took a deep breath. My heart was pounding. Tracy looked down at her hands, her face pale and drawn. It was clear that both Mr. and Mrs. Ramsey had the best interests of their children at heart. Judge Williams continued, saying that the court must consider the stability and well-being of the children. As the mother of the children, she paused to let her words sink in. I glanced at Jack, who gave me a reassuring nod. Judge Williams said that custody of Tyler Beth and Emily would go to Mr. Blake Ramsey. Mrs. Tracy Ramsey would have visitation rights, which would be decided later. I felt a wave of relief. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. Tracy's shoulders slumped and tears welled up in her eyes. She looked devastated, but there was also a sense of resignation in her expression. Mr. Ramsey, the judge, addressed me directly. "I trust you will continue to provide a stable and loving environment for your children," he said. "The court expects both parents to work together to ensure the well-being of your children." "Yes, Your Honor," I replied, my voice steady despite the emotions churning inside me. The judge turned to Tracy. "Mrs. Ramsey, you will have the opportunity to maintain a meaningful relationship with your children. It is crucial that both of you cooperate and put your children's needs first." Tracy nodded, wiping away a tear. "Yes, Your Honor." The judge gave us both a final stern look before rising from her seat. Court is adjourned as the gavel struck. A murmur spread through the courtroom. I felt Jack's hand on my shoulder. It was a silent gesture of support. Tracy remained seated, staring at the floor. I walked over to her, unsure of what to say. She looked up at me. Blake's eyes were red and filled with pain. She said softly, "I never wanted it to come to this, neither did I." I replied gently, "We have to do what's best for the kids." She nodded, a tear slipping down her cheek. "I know," I said. "I just want them to be happy. We'll make it work." We stood there in silence for a moment. The weight of the past few months was finally starting to sink in. Tracy took a deep breath and straightened her shoulders. "Can I see them this weekend?" she asked tentatively. "Of course," I replied. "We'll work out a schedule that works for everyone." As we left the courtroom, the reality of the situation began to sink in. Life wouldn't be the same, but it was a chance to rebuild and find a new normal for our family that evening after we'd put the kids to bed. I sat in the living room with Jack. He'd stayed for dinner to make sure I was okay. "How are you holding up?" I asked, sipping my coffee. "It's been a lot," I admitted, leaning back in my chair. "But I'm relieved at least now. We have a plan." "You did the right thing, Blake. Jack said the kids need stability, and you'll give them that." I nodded, grateful for his support. "Thanks, Jack. I don't know what I would have done without you." He smiled. "That's what friends are for." After Jack left, I wandered upstairs to check on the kids. Tyler was fast asleep with his favorite toy. In the twins' room, Beth and Emily were curled up together, looking so peaceful and innocent. I stood there for a moment, just watching them. My heart swelled with love. I knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but I was determined to give my children the best life. As I looked at them, I felt a renewed sense of purpose and hope that we would get through this together. The months following the verdict were challenging, but also filled with moments of unexpected joy. Adjusting to life as a single parent wasn't easy, but the love I had for my children gave me the strength to keep going. Tyler, Beth, and Emily adapted quickly to the new routine, surprising me every day. We settled into a new rhythm, with mornings being a flurry of breakfast, school runs, and quick hugs before I headed to work. Evenings were filled with homework, dinner, and bedtime stories. I made sure to spend quality time with each of them, listening to their stories and helping with homework. One Saturday morning, I was in the kitchen making pancakes when Tyler walked in, rubbing his sleepy eyes. He looked at me and asked, "Dad, can we go to the park today?" I replied, "Of course, buddy. Let's make a day of it." Beth and Emily soon joined us, giggling and chatting about their plans. They had some great plans for the day. It was so nice to hear them laughing and chatting. It made me realize what really matters. Later that day, we went to the park. I watched them run and laugh, feeling a sense of peace despite everything. We were finding our way that evening, after the kids were in bed. I sat in the living room, reflecting on how far we'd come. I was interrupted by a knock on the door. I opened it to find Tracy standing there looking anxious and uncertain. "Blake, can we talk?" she asked. I nodded and stepped aside to let her in. We sat on the couch, the tension between us palpable. "How are the kids?" she asked. Her eyes scanned the room as if searching for signs. I told her that they were doing well and that they were just like their mom, who was very resilient. She smiled, but there were tears in her eyes. She said that she had missed them and that they had missed me too. I told her that we were working through things. Tracy took a deep breath and said that she was sorry for everything. "I know you might find it hard to forgive me, but I want you to know that I regret everything." I looked at her and saw remorse in her eyes. "Tracy, it's been tough for all of us, but we're moving forward." She nodded and tears streamed down her face. "I know I just want to be a part of their lives, and if there's any chance of being a part of your life too." I'm feeling a mix of emotions. "Tracy, it's going to take time. Trust doesn't rebuild overnight, but for the sake of the kids, we can start with small steps." She nodded eagerly. "I'll do anything. I just want a chance to make things right." "We'll take it one day at a time," I said. "But you have to understand that things are different now. We need to rebuild trust. It'll take effort from both of us." She reached out and took my hand. "Thanks, Blake. I promise I'll do whatever it takes." As she left that night, I felt a sense of cautious hope. It wouldn't be easy, but perhaps there was a chance for healing for all of us in the weeks that followed. Tracy began visiting the kids regularly. We worked on co-parenting. As we started to rebuild our relationship, we realized that parenting was about ensuring the children felt loved and supported. One evening, as we sat together for dinner, Beth looked up at us with a smile. She and Moni wanted to have a movie night. Tracy and I exchanged a look, and we both knew what she meant. "Let's make some popcorn and pick a movie," we said. As we settled in for the movie, the kids snuggled between us. I felt a sense of contentment. We weren't perfect, and we still had a long way to go, but we were moving forward together that night. As I tucked the kids into bed, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. Life had taken an unexpected turn, but it had also given me a chance to rebuild and find a new beginning. I stood in the doorway of their room watching them sleep. I knew that no matter what the future held, we would face it together. For the first time in a long while, I felt a sense of hope for what lay ahead.